right, so we're diving into shadowing today.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I've got to say, the research on this technique,
Okay.
it's fascinating.
Mhm.
It's not just about mimicking like a parrot,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
It's like a language learning brain hack.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
You know what intrigued me was how shadowing engages multiple cognitive processes
Uh-huh.
simultaneously. You're training your brain to decode sounds,
Right.
map them to meaning, and then reproduce them accurately,
Yeah.
all in real time.
Yeah, it's more than just a pronunciation exercise, right?
Exactly.
Like the podcast episode we're using for this deep dive,
Okay.
they talked about how shadowing helps you absorb the natural rhythm and intonation of English.
Precisely. Yeah, think of it this way.
Okay.
Intonation is like the punctuation of spoken language.
Uh-huh.
Take a simple phrase like,
Yeah.
are you coming?
Okay.
If you emphasize you,
Right.
it becomes a direct question.
Yeah.
But if you stress coming,
Ooh.
it expresses surprise or disbelief.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it quite like that before.
Yeah.
So by shadowing, you're essentially training your ear and your voice
Right.
to pick up on those subtleties and replicate them naturally.
Exactly. And the podcast highlighted a really interesting point
Okay.
about connected speech, which is how words blend together in natural conversation.
Yeah.
For example, going to often becomes gonna.
Right.
Shadowing helps you internalize these patterns without even consciously
Wow.
thinking about them.
So it's like you're building a sort of intuitive understanding of
Yeah.
how the language flows
Yeah.
rather than just memorizing individual words
Yeah,
and grammar rules.
precisely. And this is where the concept of muscle memory comes in.
Ooh, muscle memory.
I know it sounds a bit strange when applied to speaking,
Right.
but the more you engage those neural pathways involved in language production,
Yeah.
the smoother and more automatic your speech becomes.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like training for a marathon. At first, every step feels like a conscious effort,
Yeah.
but eventually your body just knows what to do.
And just like a runner wouldn't start with a marathon,
Right.
it's important to choose the right material when you're starting with shadowing.
Okay.
The podcast episode recommended starting with short, simple audio clips,
Okay.
maybe a minute or two long,
Yeah.
and gradually increasing the difficulty.
They had some great suggestions for finding beginner-friendly material,
Oh, yeah.
like podcasts with slow speaking options or audiobooks.
Right.
Narrated clearly. I'm thinking for someone starting out,
Huh?
an audiobook chapter might be good because you get used to one speaker's style and pace
Yeah,
for a longer stretch.
that's an excellent point. Consistency, especially at the beginning,
Yeah.
can really help you internalize those subtle patterns of pronunciation and intonation
Right.
more effectively.
Now, I have to admit, when I first tried shadowing,
Uh-huh.
I felt a bit self-conscious.
Right.
Like I was just awkwardly mimicking someone. It took me a while to get over that feeling and just focus on the process.
It's completely normal to feel that way.
Okay.
The podcast hosts were really reassuring about this, saying that almost everyone experiences
Yeah.
some level of self-consciousness or frustration,
Right.
especially when starting out.
They had some great tips for overcoming those initial hurdles, like slowing down the audio speed,
Right.
practicing in private where you feel comfortable,
Uh-huh.
and even recording yourself to track your progress.
Recording yourself is such a valuable tool.
Yeah.
Not only can you literally hear the improvement over time,
Right.
which can be incredibly motivating,
Okay.
but it also allows you to pinpoint specific areas where you might be struggling.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you're consistently mispronouncing a certain sound
Yeah.
or stumbling over a particular grammatical structure.
That's so true.
Yeah,
It takes the guesswork out of it.
exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of choosing material
Okay.
and overcoming those initial challenges. But I'm curious about how to actually approach a shadowing session. Is it literally just listening and repeating word for word?
While that's the foundation,
Okay.
there are nuances to it.
Okay.
The podcast emphasized the importance of not just mimicking the words,
Right.
but also trying to capture the speaker's energy and emotion.
Ooh.
Imagine you're trying to embody the speaker,
Okay.
almost like an actor stepping into a role.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not just about pronunciation.
Right.
It's about conveying the full meaning and intent behind the words.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get really interesting as you move beyond the basics.
Okay.
The podcast episode touched on some advanced techniques that I think our listener
Ooh.
will find fascinating.
Okay, advanced techniques. Hit me with them. I'm ready to level up my shadowing game.
One technique they mention is called selective shadowing,
Okay.
which I think is brilliant for targeted practice instead of trying to shadow an entire audio clip perfectly.
Yeah.
You choose specific sections that are particularly challenging
Okay.
for you. Maybe it's a phrase with tricky pronunciation or a sentence with complex grammar.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like focusing your energy on the areas that need the most work.
Exactly.
So for instance, if I struggle with the th sound,
Right.
I could pick out phrases with that sound and really drill them until I get it right.
Exactly. It's all about making your practice as efficient and effective as possible.
Okay, cool.
Another advanced technique they discussed was shadowing with different accents.
Oh, that's a great idea. I usually listen to American English podcasts,
Yeah.
but I know I need to get more comfortable with British and Australian accents too. It's like having a whole toolbox of different pronunciation styles at your disposal.
Precisely. And by exposing yourself to a variety of accents,
Right.
you not only broaden your comprehension skills, but also become more adaptable and flexible
Yeah.
in your own speaking. You start to understand the nuances of how English is spoken around the world.
It's like you're training your ear to decode those subtle variations in pronunciation and intonation.
Yeah,
I can see how that would be incredibly valuable for anyone who uses English in an international context.
absolutely. Now, beyond pronunciation and intonation,
Okay.
the podcast also touched on the idea of incorporating facial expressions and body language into your shadowing practice, especially if you're working with video content.
Yeah, that sounds like a whole other level of challenge.
Yeah,
But I can see how it would be beneficial.
right.
I mean, communication is so much more than just words, right?
Exactly.
We're constantly picking up on those non-verbal cues for the people we're talking to.
By mirroring the speaker's facial expressions and gestures,
Right.
you're not just practicing pronunciation, you're actually embodying the language in a more holistic way.
It's almost like you're stepping into the speaker's shoes, feeling the emotions behind the words.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that would really help with fluency and naturalness.
And it can also be a lot of fun. Think of it as adding a theatrical element to your language learning routine.
You know, speaking of getting into the flow of the language,
Yeah.
one thing that really struck me in the podcast was the emphasis on building confidence through shadowing.
That's such a key point.
Yeah.
The host talked about how the ability to keep up with native speakers
Right.
and sound more natural can really boost your confidence,
Yeah.
which in turn makes you more willing to speak and practice.
It's like that fear of making mistakes starts to melt away because you've already proven to yourself
right.
that you can do it. You've
Yeah.
trained your brain and your mouth to work together seamlessly.
Yeah.
It's like that aha moment when you realize you can actually hold a conversation
right.
without overthinking every word.
It's about moving from that hesitant, self-conscious state to a more confident, expressive way
Right.
of communicating.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the potential of shadowing. I'm starting to see it as more than just a language learning technique.
Yeah.
It's almost like a personal development tool for building confidence and communication skills.
That's a fantastic insight. And it speaks to the broader implications of this technique.
Okay.
We've been focusing on English fluency, but I think the principles of shadowing could be applied to other areas as well.
Oh, like what? I'm curious.
Well, think about public speaking, for example.
Okay.
Imagine shadowing a charismatic speaker, mimicking their delivery style and stage presence.
Wow, that's a brilliant idea. It's like a form of mental rehearsal
Uh-huh.
where you're training your body and your mind to perform confidently in front of an audience.
Or what about musical improvisation?
Okay.
Could shadowing a skilled musician's solos help you internalize those melodic patterns
Wow.
and develop your own improvisational skills?
I love that idea. It's like you're absorbing the essence of their style and technique through repeated listening and imitation.
The key principle of shadowing:
Yeah.
attentive listening, real-time mimicry, and consistent repetition.
Right.
Seems applicable to a wide range of skills that involve real-time performance and creative expression.
This is blowing my mind. So shadowing could be a secret weapon for improving not just language skills,
Exactly.
but also public speaking, musical ability, and maybe even other areas we haven't even thought of yet.
Exactly. It's all about taking this simple yet powerful technique and seeing where it can lead you.
Right.
Who knows what doors it might open.
Yeah, this whole idea of applying shadowing beyond language learning,
Right.
it has me thinking about all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah.
It's like a new lens for looking at skill development in general.
It really is, and it highlights the power of observation,
Huh?
Imitation and repetition in mastering any craft.
Right.
We often think about these as basic learning strategies,
Yeah.
but shadowing shows how sophisticated they can become.
So for our listener who's ready to give shadowing a shot,
Oh.
maybe for English fluency or even something else,
Right.
where's the best place to start?
I'd say the first step is choosing your material wisely.
Okay.
Find something that's engaging just a bit above your current level,
Yeah.
but not so difficult that it's discouraging.
Right.
Think bite-sized pieces at first, just to get the feel for it.
You mentioned audiobooks and podcasts earlier,
Right.
which are great options.
Yeah,
But I bet you could even use scenes from movies or TV shows, right?
absolutely.
Especially if you're working on specific accents or expressions.
The key is to pick something you enjoy listening to,
Yeah.
because that will make the whole process much more enjoyable and sustainable.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
Right.
We've talked about so many different approaches to shadowing, from basic mimicking
Uh-huh.
to incorporating body language. I'm curious to hear what our listener discovers as they explore this technique.
Me too. It's a journey of discovery, not just in terms of language or specific skills,
Right.
but also in terms of understanding how we learn and how we can push our own boundaries.
And I think that's a fantastic takeaway for our listener. Shadowing is more than just a technique. It's a mindset of active learning, embracing challenges,
Right.
and constantly striving to improve.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So, to our listener out there, we encourage you to dive into the world of shadowing.
Yes.
Experiment, have fun, and see where this powerful technique takes you.
Right.
You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself and your own potential.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so that wraps up our deep dive on shadowing.
Great stuff.
It's a technique with so much potential, and I'm excited for everyone to try it out and see the results for themselves.
Yeah, me too.
We'll catch you in the next episode.